All right, next question. This one begins as a statement and then moves into a question. The ideology that the rapture will happen in mid-tribulation is very problematic for creating disciples. Shouldn't it be condemned and put in the appropriate context? Great question. And because these questions are submitted anonymously, I don't pretend to know the background of whoever submitted this question. I will say, we've kind of focused these questions and said, let's keep the questions rooted in either the passage we're in a given Sunday or in the message from a given Sunday. And so from a passage perspective, I can't really address this question because while the passage we were in, it mentions that John's experiencing tribulation along with the other churches of Asia, which is actually, that is helpful to recognize that. The question about rapture and tribulation and all of that actually comes much later in the book. And so from a passage perspective, I can't really address that inductively right now. But what I can say is I mentioned tribulation and rapture in my message because I talked about my own background. I talked about what it was like to be a child growing up in the American church of the 70s and 80s, and some of the teaching I heard about end times and how that impacted me and other people that I saw. So here's what I want to say about that. I remember going to, I think it was in my Bible class. I attended a private Christian school in addition to attending a Christian church. I think it was my Bible teacher who did a series on end times, and he took us through what he framed as the primary views of the end times. And so we talked about three options, that there was a pre-tribulation rapture, a mid-tribulation rapture, or a post-tribulation rapture. All of those having to do with the idea, the rapture being a time that the church is taken out of the world prior to the second coming, and the rest of creation experiences a time of persecution and tribulation, and then the church is brought back. And so all of the dialogue was when does that happen? What I didn't appreciate or understand, and I don't think I was taught, was that all three of those views are just slightly different nuances of the same view. Okay, so I mentioned this yesterday, that there's a school of thought, an eschatological framework for interpreting Revelation that didn't emerge in church history until the 1800s, but it did become the most popular one in the 1900s, and even today it's still a very dominant eschatology. So it's called dispensational premillennialism. And those three views, pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, post-tribulation, those are all just nuanced takes within that one school of thought. It wasn't until I got to Bible school that I was presented with a broader understanding of eschatology, and actually was taught that there's actually four primary ways of interpreting Revelation and the end times that the church has held throughout church history. Some of them much older, some of them emerging in the first century and whatnot. So I don't have time to go into all that today. That would be a whole series. But for the sake of just responding in this question, what I want to encourage you to do is, if that's new information for you, I want to encourage you to pick up this brochure. We carry this in our bookstore. Okay, it's called Four Views of the End Times. It's not a Vineyard publication. It's put out by Hendrickson Publishing. One of the things I like about it is they do a summary, including diagrams of each of the four views and the major ways that they approach different aspects of eschatology. They give a little bit of background in terms of when it emerged, who has held this view in terms of individuals or denominations. They include a diagram of how they see church history playing out in between the cross and the second coming. And so even being able to see those diagrams and compare them, you can see the differences in these schools of thought. I find it really helpful. And what I like about the publication is they've done a pretty, I think, a really fair job of representing each of the four views. It's reductionistic because they're trying to fit it into a pamphlet, but I can't tell which view they hold, right? What I mean by that is they didn't share one view and then do really well with that, and then kind of dismiss all the other three with kind of straw man arguments. It's just really well done. So I believe this is I think it's $5 in our bookstore, and Rihanna Freeman, our bookstore director, and Pastor Mike will have this available. Encourage you to pick one of those up. If nothing else, to broaden your framework for being able to go through Revelation as we read it and look at different ways that the church has interpreted it historically. Okay? Great question.